Internal family systems model now is becoming much more popular, much more well-known, and its rapid increase is because of its efficacy. It's a model that works very well. There are now online circle programs, online continuity programs where people can learn more about the model, watch more demonstrations of the model, and yet the missing piece is the practice. My students talk about the difference between watching someone swimming and getting in the pool. So I'm now offering practice sessions online, maximum of 3 people, 90 minutes for the session, and you get to practice as therapist for the entire time, or observer or client. The invitation is to spend 6 sessions working with each other, separated by 2 weeks. How you like to be supervised, you can let me know. I can come in and intervene when it looks like you're going off track, or we could wait until the very end of the session. You can then feedback on your own performance. You can hear feedback from the client. You can hear feedback from the observer. And the sessions are recorded on Zoom, which is HIPAA compliant. That means that you get to review your own performance and see where your own parts might have hijacked you, where therapist parts might have come in to do the work, where you may have lost your self-energy, where you may have got stuck. It's exciting to see the popularity of the model. It's exciting to see how many people now know of it. And as you're watching the various programs that teach this model, there will inevitably be things that come up in session that you're not prepared for. You can also bring those concerns to these practice sessions. So there's a variety of ways of practicing the model so that you get to develop greater sense of competence, a greater sense of confidence, and the ability to be able to bring this into your own practice beyond just the theoretical. There's a nice international flavor to the work as well, as participants come from all over the world. If you go to my website and you want to sign up for this, there are various times to accommodate the different locations that people come from, and you are asked to commit to 6 sessions. Okay, if that's of interest to you, then I look forward to hearing from you. Bye for now.
So anyway, that's the pitch. The protector, it gives us permission or not. If it doesn't give us permission, we don't go. It doesn't give us permission, we just stay with it. Keep working with it, keep loving it up, keep honoring it, keep pitching to it. At some point it gets worn down and it gives us permission. We go to the exile. Sometimes exiles are furious with self initially. They turn their back. It's a little kid. Where were you when I needed you? You locked me up and abandoned me 20 years ago. Why should I talk to you? Why should I have anything to do with you? Sometimes there has to be this kind of repair where self apologizes. I'm really sorry I wasn't there for you. I didn't actually have the body to protect you, but I wish I could have. And I'm sorry I let these other parts talk me into locking you up all this time. And now I'm here to help you and get you out of here. Some kind of repair like that. So we don't do anything until there's this trusting relationship between the self and the exile. At which point I used to think, okay, that's great, we're done. But it turns out that that isn't enough because these burdens are still there. And to unburden, parts need 2 other steps at least. First, they need you, not me, the therapist, necessarily. They need yourself to get what happened when they got hurt or shamed or terrified and how bad it was. They need you to become a compassionate witness to your own history. And to do that until they feel fully witnessed. Like now you finally get it. You finally get it. At which point, they need you to go into that scene and be with them in the way they needed back then, which might involve a whole big deal of yelling at the abuser for them or talking to the mother and whatever they needed back there, doing that until they're ready to leave that time and place with you and come to a safe place. It could be in the present, it could be a fantasy place. At which point, when they feel like they can stay there, they don't have to ever go back. Most these exiles are willing to unload the emotions and beliefs they got from those experiences. They're willing to unburden. And we have a little ritual for that, how they want to send it out of the system. It's the elements, light, water, fire, wind, earth, anything else, whatever they want to send it to. They send it out, immediately feel much lighter, much more playful. And sometimes much more exposed, much emptier. So we learned that there's also a step of having them invite into their body qualities they might need in the future, which kind of fills up whatever holes the burdens had been created when they left. And they feel more solid, they feel more consolidated. And now what do they want to do? And often they just want to play. And now we bring in all the protectors to see that they are freed up. They don't have to protect this one anymore. And some of them have this big, oh my God, what am I going to do now? Are you going to downsize me reaction? So we have to reassure them, no, there's another role waiting for you when you're ready. And they carry burdens too, and they may have to unburden themselves. They may need a whole session of their own. Many of them are stuck back in that same scene. They need their own retrieval before they be totally freed up to do this other role. So we do that, maybe the next session. And then it's off to the next, what we call clove of the garlic. So what psychotherapy, what vegetable has psychotherapy been compared to the most? Onion, where you peel away the layers and there's this core and you heal that and the client's done. IFS is a different vegetable. It's a bulb of garlic. We have all these different sort of isolated cloves that have sets of managers and firefighters and exiles based on one scene or two scenes. And you go in, you clear all that out, everybody's happy, but you didn't touch any of these other cloves. And so you've got to go to those too. And like that. Until you've cleaned out a lot, and clients are improving in many ways as they go. We did an outcome study recently of PTSD through the trauma center, Bessel van der Kolk's trauma center. 13 moderate to severe PTSD clients got 16 sessions of IFS. At the end, only one person still qualified for PTSD. And they still had a lot of work to do. So people are incrementally improving in their functioning, and they still got a bunch of exiles stuck in other places. So it's kind of, we just do it until people feel like, okay, you got most of it, I think. For now, anyway, I might come back. So that's the process. It is wonderful sacred work. I feel like I meditated for an hour. I don't feel drained after those sessions. I'm in self. If I notice my parts getting triggered, just relax. If you had a microphone on my head, just step back, let me handle this. You know, it always goes better if you let me stay. Just let me stay. I'm checking my body. This is how I notice how much self is present. My heart open. Do I have a big agenda here? If so, step back, step back. There's a kind of vibrating energy other systems call ki or prana. We call this self-energy that vibrates, runs through my body. When I'm really there, I'm checking, is that running? Is that happening? That's mainly what I'm doing, and then offering a little guidance here and there to clients. And the other nice thing about IFS is clients do it on their own. I have a bunch of clients who the first 15, 20 minutes, they're just reciting everything they did during the week. And then we go in and we do some more. Because it becomes a live practice. It's not a psychotherapy, really. It's a way of being in the world where you're noticing who's here all the time. And you're inviting them to trust you more and more all the time. So there are three main goals with IFS, with individuals. The first one, talked about a lot, which is the liberation of these parts from their roles they're stuck in, whether they're protectors or exiles, so they can be who they're designed to be. Second one, what I call the restoration of trust of the parts in the self's leadership. And the third is the reharmonizing of this inner system so that parts get to know and cooperate with each other and love each other and becomes one big happy inner family. And when people get there, they feel much more unitary. Not because the parts have disappeared, which is the pernicious idea that was perpetrated by the DID community. What they call integration was the disappearance of parts. They are there, but because they're in harmony, they don't stand out. Anybody seen on YouTube maybe this murmurization of starlings? You know what I'm talking about? If you haven't seen it, Google it. It's amazing. Because it looks like one organism moving flock of birds, you know. And you could still pull a bird out of that flock, it would have autonomy. But when it's in that energy, that sort of energetic unity, it's in harmony. It seems like one organism. That's what we're shooting for. Questions now? Or reactions? Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between self as an adult and self as a child?
No difference. So self doesn't develop.
That I thought, so it's the same.
Now, what develops is the hardware. So self can only manifest depending on how much of a brain you have or how much of a body you have. So a child can't manifest as much self in the outside world. But kids can access enough self to heal themselves. Is this making any sense?
Yeah, I just have quite a few clients right now that have that an exile doesn't, is rejecting self. So I'm just trying to figure out my understanding of this.
Yeah.
And I know that there needs to be repair work.
And that's what I'll often have clients say. I didn't have the body back then to protect you. I didn't have the hardware.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and parts get it. The exiles will get that. Yeah. Yeah.
What's the optimum balance between you talking to parts and parts talking to parts?
Good question, yeah.
Could you repeat it?
Oh, what's the optimum balance between me talking to parts and parts talking to parts? Well, you missed a possibility in there, which is self talking to parts.
But that's a part talking to parts. But
No.
I understand, okay, it's not a part. It's
Not a part.
Okay.
Right. So, ideally, self is talking to parts. Now, there are many times, especially with certain clients, where either that's not possible or it's efficient for me to talk to the part directly. And that's a process we call direct access, as opposed to what we call insight, which is when self is talking to parts. So the reason we privilege self to part interaction, this is what I call attachment theory taken inside. We want self to become that good attachment figure rather than therapist. So if I talk to the exiles all the time, they're going to attach to me, which is a lot of what traditional psychotherapy is. And you work the transference, and the therapist becomes that attachment figure. And in attachment-based therapies, that's the goal, for you to become a kind of internalized, good parent. Am I right? Now, that's hard work. So this is different. This is privileging that relationship, that inner relationship between self and the parts. Because when my clients are done, they say some version of, you're a pretty good therapist, but I healed myself. And that's what you're shooting for. That's what you want. So, but direct access is really important. And there are 4 reasons we typically shift from insight to direct access. One of them is, like I said earlier, when there's just no access to self, you don't have a choice. You know you're talking to a part. And there's very little trust in self, so you're not getting much there. So I'll just make it explicit. Okay, so now I'm talking to this part that doesn't trust me. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. So you're the part of Tom who doesn't trust anybody? Yeah, that's right. Okay, tell me about why you don't trust me. And I'll have this personal relationship with it, communication with it. And at some point I'll say, okay, it's great to get to know you. Let me talk to Tom again. Are you there? Yeah. Did you hear all that? Yeah. How do you feel toward this part now? So it's also a way to separate. You get a little more separation from a part that's very blended. We didn't really talk about blending, but it's a big part of the model too. There are times where the system is so afraid of a part, it would take session after session to get the scared parts to go into a kind of waiting room, that it just is efficient for me to talk to, like a suicide part. Let me talk to this part that wants to kill you. Oh, okay, so you're the one who wants to kill Risa, is that right, Risa? Okay, why do you want to kill her? And I'll have this, so, and then in the conversation they're learning it isn't what they thought, and then everybody relaxes about it more, and now they're not so afraid of it, now we can work with it. And I'll hand the baton back to the client self. And then whenever there's a part that doesn't trust me or doesn't trust anybody, I want to talk to it directly. I want to have a personal relationship with it. So let me talk to the one that doesn't trust. I'll do direct access with it. So those are some of the common reasons. We'll flip to direct access, but generally trying to flip back to self, who, again, we're trying to have be the primary caretaker. Yeah.
I was going to say, I'm dealing with some client parts that think the world runs magically. What do you do with that?
You mean yourself or your
No,
client?
no,
A client has a part that thinks the world runs magically.
For example, you would ask the question, did your words affect the water that you drink, and therefore shouldn't you drink the water?
He has a part that would ask, did my words affect this water, so he shouldn't drink the water, something like that. There's a bit of paranoia to it.
Yes.
So I actually, the other plenary at our conference this year is going to be on schizophrenia, because I've had a lot of luck with schizophrenics. This is the first time I've got video of it. So I've got a video of a guy in a second, this is a consult, second consult with him, where we go to the schizophrenic part, love it up, give it a lot of honoring, and it talks about what it protects, and it shifts out of that kind of thinking. Don't argue with it, don't get into the details of whether its paranoid fantasies are real or not. Just try and love it up and give it a lot of kudos for protecting so well, and ask more about what it was needed at the time and what it's protecting. Yeah. So too often the big mistake clients do is they get into the debating the story that the part is giving for its protective reasons, which are debates you'll never win. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question about explaining to parts that don't trust self why it was that self allowed the protectors to lock them up. And is it because self recognized the external resources were not there? And
That's one of those questions I don't really have the answer to.
Why the self?
Why self? Because it's very similar in a way. Why does self allow certain protectors to totally take over? Is something I don't totally know. It's similar to the question people ask, if God is so powerful, why did God let this happen? It's basically the same question, right? I don't know. Ask God. I have no idea. And the selves I've talked to don't really know either. It just kind of happens. It's one of those rules. I mean, there is one level of a very spiritual answer, which is if this stuff didn't happen this way, we wouldn't learn anything here. And this is a very difficult school. And these guides are all cheering the fact that they were chose to do this here. So if self could be all-powerful, then there wouldn't be much to learn, basically. Yeah?
We tend to have more parts as trauma increases,
Do we take on more parts? Is that what you said?
create more like.
Yeah, so this is another myth that came out of the trauma world, starting with Pierre Genet, who I love in many ways. He made many, many discoveries that are very useful, but he saw parts, and he identified them, but he assumed they were the product of trauma. So he assumed that it was the mono mind, the unitary mind, that was blown apart by the trauma, so he pathologized them. So parts are not created. They are forced into extreme roles. So if you ask the question, are there more parts that get it forced into more extreme roles? The answer is yes, the more trauma you accrue. I didn't mention legacy burdens, and I should. So far I've talked about burdens you got from direct experience in your life, but there's another class of burden that's very important that we call legacy burdens that came into your system through your family or from your ethnic group or from our culture, all the isms, sexism and patriarchy and homophobia and all of those. We all take on a little bit, pieces of, and parts carry those. Racism. So these are burdens, actually, once you get to them, in some ways are easier to unburden because you don't have to do the witnessing. It didn't happen to you. You don't have to do the retrieval. It's stuck, it might be decades or generations earlier that just trickled down in your family. So when you get to them, you can often, do you like carrying this stuff? No, I don't. Didn't know I had a choice. Would you like to unload it? Yeah, that'd be great. Boom, you can unload it. Except for the many times when they say, if I unload this, I'm being disloyal to my people, or I lose my relationship with my father, this is the only thing, or he's going to suffer because I've been carrying this for him, or there are those kind of common objections. So we just negotiate those. But that's a whole other class of burdens. Yeah?
Have you ever come across somebody that focus on body symptoms but cannot pull out parts?
Focus on body symptoms, but what?
Cannot pull out parts.
Can't pull out parts from that?
Yeah.
Initially, some people have a, what do you think, I'm Sybil kind of reaction to the idea that they have parts. And so there is a part that's blocking any access. And so then I'll say, is there a part that's really afraid to focus inside and to do this work? And that's usually what it's about, and then I'll work with that part. Okay, how are we doing break-wise?
How long is the video, Dick?
It'd take about 50 minutes.
Okay, so
So we should take a break now.
take a break now. Or
Yeah.
maybe take a couple more questions because they're still setting up the bookstore and then take a break.
Okay, sure.
Check the bookstore.
A couple more questions, yeah. Ken?
Maybe not a question, but an answer to the person who was asking, why did the self-protector become extreme?
Yeah.
And you answered, I don't know.
Well, I was more answering, why does the self allow protectors to take over?
Okay. So I have struggled with this question, and I found a quote that helps me have some peace with not having the answer. And it's from Keats, a poet, in 1813 or 1830. He wrote about a negative capability. Not negative in a bad way, but a capability to be with uncertainty, mystery, and doubts, without the irritable need to grasp after fact or reason.
There you have it. Yeah.
So, how much agency does self have by itself? That's a sort of
Yeah.
along the lines of this question. Does it need to ally with affective parts? To
No. So, I mean, there are various conceptions of self in the Eastern spiritual traditions, for example, which are very passive. And Jung adopted that idea of self, basically, as a passive witness, a place to get to, but not an active leader. And so I assumed that was the case when I first encountered it. But just as I experimented over and over, once fully released, self has tremendous agency. And there are many protectors that don't believe that initially. And so they think, if I don't keep doing this and protecting you this way, self is a wimp, you know? But it turns out, I didn't get into this. So when I was observing self in all these different people, at some point I decided to catalog the qualities that would emerge spontaneously. So we have what we call the 8 C's of self-leadership, and I mentioned, I think, 4 so far. But most common in the beginning ones are curiosity. Certain parts step back. How do you feel now? Just curious. But said from a place of calm and confidence.
What?
And confidence. And, like I said, sometimes, very spontaneously, compassion is there. I feel sorry for the part, care about it, I want to help it. So this is another myth that's in the spiritual traditions, that you have to build up the muscle of compassion by practicing metta or whatever the practice is all the time. You don't. It's right there. It's just beneath the surface of these parts that keep your heart closed. When they open your heart, it's all right there. So compassion, and then courage. So inherent in self is courage. Courage to go into these abysses inside, courage to deal with people on the outside. Clarity. So you have a client focus on a part that they're afraid of, it looks like a monster, it looks very threatening. You ask the fear to step back. They look at it again, it looks like a teenage kid. Their image has shifted. Now it's a much more clear image of what it really is, the part. And the same is true when you're working with couples. I'll show some video of that maybe. And they're in their protectors when they're interacting with each other, and you get both to go in and get their protectors to step back. They suddenly look much more attractive to each other. And I've had that experience now maybe a monthly basis. In the beginning, it was a lot more frequently with my wife, where there's a part that when she triggers it, she looks really ugly. I can't stand how she looks. Why did I marry this person? And then as soon as it steps back, oh, that's why. She's beautiful. Anybody identify with that? So clarity, that should be 7, right? 6? Oh, creativity. Creativity.
Connection.
And then connectedness, yeah. So those are the 8 C's of self-leadership, and especially courage, confidence, and clarity imply action and the ability to act in the outside world and the inside world much more effectively. Like I've been training social activists in France the last couple of years, and most of them are they came to social activism because of something that happened to them when they were a kid. And so they have parts that get involved in the social activism and alienate people. They're righteous, and when we get them to do it from self, it's a totally different response from other people. And they're much more effective. Self is much more effective than protectors at protecting you. So, yeah.
A client, they've identified that the exiles are in a vault. You can describe it, written poetry about it. There's about 20 locks on it. Do we go in with one lock at a time?
No? Yeah, initially,
Can you repeat the question?
yeah, this young lady has a client who's got her exiles in a vault with 20 locks on it. And the question is, do we have to go through each lock one at a time? Usually the big, scary fortress thing is some part just showing how impenetrable it is. And if you work with that part, then it's like I was saying about my wife being ugly. Suddenly, the exiles are there once it gives you permission. Yeah. Yeah.
So I have,
Glad she didn't come this week.
so I have clients who have difficulty finding the part inside their body. Their body is so, it's so hard to be with.
Yeah, or they're out of their body. They don't feel their body. They're scared to feel their body. So, yeah, in such clients, you first want to work with the parts that keep them out of their body and are afraid to let them feel anything. And they're usually pretty severe trauma survivors. Yeah. I was just at the trauma conference that the Bessel's group organizes last weekend, actually. And they're recommending all these body-centered, bottom-up approaches, like yoga, like a bunch of other things, because it's too threatening, and what they say, the cerebral cortex isn't online, and blah, blah, blah. And my thing was, and I said it, a lot of people that are going to really be very, very upset if you start trying to do yoga with them, until you've worked with their protectors who don't want them to feel anything and gotten permission to start doing these body practices. So, yeah. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about legacy burdens? Because one thing that is coming up with a lot of young people that I see is they're deeply, deeply affected right now by Me Too, by racism, by many things that actually have not necessarily affected them personally.
Right.
But they have certainly burdened themselves, particularly, I'm quite connected to university students, so
Yeah.
particularly on campuses.
Yeah.
And it's almost like within the space of 6 months or a year, some of the young people that I work with have become traumatized by what they see or are exposed to through their colleagues at university or on social media.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I haven't worked with college kids for quite a while, so it's hard for me to speak to this particular phenomena very articulately. But in general, like for example, when I work with therapists who are burned out, this might be an analogy. Generally, you can find a part that thinks that for them to be effective, they have to take in the energy of their client. They have to take in some of that emotion and carry it with them. And often, if you go back, when they were kids, they were so desperate for their parents to get along that they would take in some of that energy to try and be effective. And it may be analogous, I don't really know. Yeah, I can't be articulate about that, I'm sorry. Yeah.
It's not the same because it's what's mine, what's not mine, right? So it's almost like those, you said you don't like that, but it's almost introjected,
Yeah.
right? Beliefs, also perpetrator's voice is introjected. So should that be analyzed in the same way as you analyze something that's not yours?
You know, the analogy to an introject is a burden. And as long as you think of it as something that gets stuck in a part rather than the part itself, I'm fine with the word.
What part? The exiles or? Like
Different parts take on different burdens, but in her case, it's probably exiles that feel for the victims, and then protectors who take on this righteous, we've got to do something about this. Which, now that I think back, I'm a child of the 60s, and I was no less obnoxious back then. And I had those parts. If I had a gun and Nixon was in front of me, boom, So I think it's just the age, partly. Yeah.
Well, I had a question about kind of staying on there with the legacy burden, and potentially, I'm wondering how they intersect with if they do have like
if they do have a similar,
Like similar traumas, it's almost like a legacy burden that they have,
yeah, and then that, in their life something similar to the,
similar to whatever that they
yeah, so whatever's similar to the burdens you already carry gets amplified in a big way. So a lot of vets we work with, for example, who have PTSD, you go and they've got parts stuck in battle. And our pitch to the Marines, for example, is, you know, their motto is no man left behind. You left those parts behind. Let's go get them. They love that. And once you get there, most of them have parts that are stuck in similar places in the past, or they carry legacy burdens that got triggered by that. So, yeah.
How much, when we talk about asking like the parts to step aside or looking at them and governing themselves, how much of this needs to be done client in your office, or how much do you encourage client to do this outside of their office?
I encourage clients to do it outside my office all the time, and also to follow up. So if we do an unburdening and there's this little child who's now playful on the beach, my homework assignment is for a month or so, every day, just make sure she's still okay. Just go as a meditation, just check with her and see if she needs anything, just remind her you're there. And if they do it for a month, then it sticks, it absolutely sticks. Last one.
So I have a question about shame, because I know burden is often about shame. I am wondering if you have a thought about why we have shame as an emotion to begin with.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Why do we have shame as an emotion? Shame for me is a three-part phenomenon. So there's a part that when your parent said you sucked, took that to heart and believed it, and now believes that you're worthless. And then there's a part that imitates your parent and tells you you suck. And then there's a part that reacts to the shame in a firefighter way to get you away from it. But the firefighter activity brings on the critic inside and the critic outside more, which goes right to the heart of that exile who feels worthless and makes the exile have more worthlessness, which makes the firefighter's job that much harder, and you get this vicious cycle. So why do we have shame? Well, I'm not sure exactly how to answer that, except that we are born with the knowledge that to survive we have to be valued by our caretakers and by the tribe. And if we're not, we're going to die. So kids all over the world do die because they're not valued. So we know this. This is in our, we come with that knowledge. And so we have an inbuilt desire to be accepted. And any chronic messages to the contrary are terrifying and motivate the parts that want so desperately to be accepted. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
And that's a big player in couples. Should I do a little riff on that before we break? So, most of us come out of our families with that burden of worthlessness, and with the burden of worthlessness comes this terror that you're not going to survive, and the drive for redemption from the person who said you are worthless. So a drive to make that person change their mind, or someone who looks, sounds, or acts like that person. And then when we go to find our partner, we have that template of the caretaker who made us feel worthless, who, if we can change their mind, we're going to survive. Everybody with this so far? It's a little, oh yeah. It's a little depressing. So you look around and you get this big hit of infatuation when you see the person who resembles your father, who in a certain way, who now says you're valuable and wants to protect you. And you get this rush because now you're going to live. Now you might even be happy. Now you're not worthless anymore. Now you're not going to die. Okay? Now, unfortunately, that person is like your father. And so they wind up hurting you the same way. And so when that happens, your protectors go into one of 4 operations. First is to try to get them to change. So you start to either blame or cajole or somehow focus all your change attempts on your partner, change back into being the redeemer. When that doesn't work, you go into changing yourself. So you lose weight, you stop being bitchy, you try to other ways to please. That doesn't work. This is not Mr. Right. Mr. Right is still out there somewhere. Mrs. Right. You give up on that person. Your parts start to scan. If you get burned enough from that, you give up on human beings and you go to drugs or work or something that can take care of you without the need for a human being, which many of our trauma survivors are in that place. But many couples come in and one partner is in one of those protector modes and the other is in another one of those. That's how they start out. Does this make sense? Yep. 15 minutes.
Just give me a second. So while you're all reflecting on your infatuations, I know I am, bookstores outside Caversham, there's 3 books that are new for those of you that were here in September. One is the Internal Family Systems Skill Training Manual, good for therapists, also good for clients. I've got clients that have been reading this and there's exercises, worksheets and techniques, meditations. There's a Daily Parts Meditation Practice by Michelle Glass, which has a lot of stuff you can use inside as well. And I love this. This is so
Thank you, good,
Oh.
thank you.
Many Minds, One Self. Dick's latest book, overview of, as I remember, overview of evidence of multiplicity from various perspectives, including shamanism, how psychology has played with multiplicity in and out over the last decade, how Freud was close and then backed off, how different world religions have spoken about self and how it all comes together in this model. At least that's my reading of it.
Very good.
I highly recommend this one.
Very good, thank you.
If you can, 15 minutes, because we've got a lot to get through. And there's tea and coffee outside.